When I last read, Uncle Hammer had just stormed out of the house to try and find Charlie Sims, and Mama had put Cassie to bed, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Mama had been right about Uncle Hammer. When I awoke the next morning and followed the smell of frying ham and bacon biscuits in the kitchen, there he sat at the table drinking coffee with Mr. Morrison. He was unshaven, looked a little bit bleary-eyed, but he was all right. I wondered if Mr. Sims looked so good. I didn't get a chance to ask because as soon as I had said good morning, Mama called me into her room where a tub of hot water was waiting by the fireplace. Hurry up, she said. Uncle Hammer is going to take us to church. In his car? Mama burrowed her frown. Well, I just don't know. He did say something about hitching up Jack. My smile faded, but then I caught the teasing glint in her eyes and she began to laugh. Oh, Mama, I laughed and splashed into the water. After my bath, I went into my mom's room to dress. When I rejoined Mama, she was combing her hair, which fanned her head like an enormous black halo. She glanced down at me. You didn't comb your hair. No, Mom. I wanted you to fix me a grown-up hairdo. Where's your brush? Right here, I said, picking up the brush from where I had laid it on the chair. Mama sat down in Papa's rocker, and I sat on the deerskin rug in front of her. Mama divided my hair from ear to ear into two sections and braided the front section to one side and the back section right in the center. Then she wound each braid into a flat bun against my head. My hair was too thick and long for me to do it well myself, but Mama could do it perfectly. I figured I looked my very best that way. When Mama finished, I ran to the mirror, then turned, facing her with a grin. She grinned back and shook her head at my vanity. One day, Mama, you gonna fix my hair like yours? That'll be a few years yet, she said, readjusting the cardboard lining she had placed in her shoes to protect her feet from the dirt and gravel, which could easily seep through the large holes in the soles. She set the shoes on the floor and stepped into them. Now, with the soles facing downward and Mama's feet in them, no one could tell what the shiny exteriors hid. Yet I felt uncomfortable for Mama and wished that we had enough money for her to have her shoes fixed, or better still, buy new ones. After breakfast, Stacy, Christopher John, Little Man, and I sat impatiently by the dying morning fire, waiting for Mama, Big Ma, and Uncle Hammer. Uncle Hammer was dressing in the boys' room, and Mama was in with Big Ma. I checked to make sure none of them was about to appear, then leaned toward Stacy and whispered, "Do you think Uncle Hammer whipped Mr. Sims?" "No," said Stacy quietly. "No!" cried Little Man. You don't mean Mr. Sims? Hang on. You don't mean Mr. Sims whipped Uncle Hammer?" stammered an unbelieving Christopher John. "Nothing happened," said Stacy in exclamation as he tugged irritably at his collar. "Nothing?" I repeated, disappointed. "Nothing." "How you know?" asked Little Man suspiciously. "Mama said so. I asked her straight out this morning." "Oh," replied Little Man, resigned. "Something must have happened." I said, "I mean, Uncle Hammer and Mr. Morrison look like they haven't been to bed. How come they look like that if nothing happened?" Mama said Mr. Morrison talked all night to Uncle Hammer, talked him tired, and wouldn't let him go to the Simses. "Oh, shoot," I exclaimed, my dream of revenge against the Simses vanishing as Stacy talked. I popped my elbows on my knees and then settled my head in my upraised hands and stared into the glowing embers. A burning knot formed in my throat, and I felt as if my body wasn't large enough to hold the frustration I felt, nor deep enough to drown the rising anger. "It ain't fair," Christopher John sympathized, patting me lightly with his pudgy hand. "Sure ain't," agreed Little Man. "Cassie," Stacy said softly. "Y'all better be glad nothing happened," he said in a whisper, "'cause I heard Big Ma tell Mama last night that if Mr. Morrison couldn't stop Uncle Hammer might get killed." "Killed?" we echoed as a fire sputtered and died. "Who'd do that?" I cried. "Not one of those puny Simses." Stacy started to speak, but then Mama and Big Ma entered, and he cautioned us into silence. Now remember, the way it happened back then, it would be a group of men in the middle of the night. When Uncle Hammer joined us, freshly shaven and in another suit, the boys and I put on our coats and headed for the door. Uncle Hammer stopped us. "Stacy, that the only coat you got, son?" he asked. Stacy looked down at his faded cotton jacket. Everyone else did too. The jacket was too small for him, that was obvious, and compared to Little Man's and Christopher John's and mine, it was adamantly in sadder shape. Yet we were all surprised Uncle Hammer would ask about it, for he knew as well as anyone that Mama had to buy us clothes in shifts. Which meant that we each had to wait our turn for new clothes. Stacy looked up at Mama, then back at Uncle Hammer. "Yes, sir," he answered. Uncle Hammer stared off at him, then, waving his hand, ordered, "Take it off." Before Stacy could question why, Uncle Hammer disappeared into the boys' room. Again, Stacy looked at Mama. "You'd better do like he says," she said. Uncle Hammer returned with a long box, store-wrapped in shiny red Christmas paper and a fancy green ribbon. He handed the package to Stacy. "It was supposed to be your Christmas present, but I think I'd better give it to you now. It's cold out there." Gingerly, Stacy took the box and opened it. "A coat!" cried Little Man joyously, clapping his hands. "Whoa," said Mom reverently. "Go ahead, Stacy. Try it on." Stacy eagerly slipped on the coat. It was much too big for him, but Mama said that she could take up the sleeves and that he'd grow into it in another year. Stacy beamed down at the coat, then up at Uncle Hammer. A year ago he would have shot into Uncle Hammer's arms and hugged his thanks. But now, at the manly age of 12, he held out his hand and Uncle Hammer shook it. "Come on, we'd better go," said Mama. The morning was gray as we stepped outside, but the rain had stopped. We followed the path of bedded rocks that led to the barn, careful not to slip in the mud, and got into the Packard, shiny clean and bright from the washing Uncle Hammer and Mr. Morrison had given it after breakfast. Inside the Packard, the world was a wine-colored luxury. The boys and I, in the back, ran our hands over the rich felt seats, tenderly fingered the fancy door handles and window knobs, and peered down amazed at the plush carpet peeping out on either side of the rubber mat. Mr. Morrison, who was not a church-going man, waved goodbye from the barn, and we sped away. As we drove onto the school grounds and parked, the people milling in front of the church turned, staring at the Packard. Then Uncle Hammer stepped from the car, and someone cried, "Well, I'll be doggone, it's our Hammer Logan!" And in a body, the crowd engulfed us. TJ ran up with Mo Turner and little Willie Wiggins to admire the car. "It's Uncle Hammer's," said Stacy proudly. But before the boys could sufficiently admire the car, Mama and Big Ma shooed us toward the church for the service. It was then that TJ noticed Stacy's new coat. Now, because we know TJ and we know the way he acts and that he's not very nice and can be petty, that what he's going to say will probably be rude. "Uncle Hammer gave it to him," I said. "Ain't it something?" TJ ran his long fingers over the lapels and shrugged. "It's all right, I guess, if you like that sort of thing." "All right!" I cried, indignant at his casual reaction to the coat. "Boy, that's the finest coat you ever laid eyes on, and you know it." TJ sighed. "Like I said, it's all right, if you like looking like a fat preacher." Then he and little Willie and Mo laughed and went on ahead. Stacy looked down at the coat with its long sleeves and wide shoulders. His smile faded. "He don't know what he's talking about," I said. "He's just jealous, that's all." "I know it," snapped Stacy sourly. As we slid into the pew in front of TJ, TJ whispered, "Here comes the preacher," and then leaned forward and said snidely, "How do you do, Reverend Logan?" Stacy turned on TJ, but I poked him hard. "Mama's looking," I whispered, and he turned back around. After church, as TJ and the others looked longingly at the car, Mama said, "Stacy, maybe TJ wants a ride." Before Stacy could reply, I spoke up hurriedly. "No, ma'am, Mama. He got something else he got to do." Then under my breath, so that I wouldn't be guilty of a lie, I added, "He gonna walk home like he always do." "That'll teach him," whispered Little Man. "Yeah," agreed Christopher John. But Stacy sulked by the window and said nothing. The sun was out now, and Uncle Hammer suggested that we take a real ride before going home. He drove us the full 22 miles up to Strawberry by the way of the Jackson Road, one of two roads leading to the town. But Mama and Big Ma objected so much to going through Strawberry that he turned the big car around and headed back toward home, taking the old soldiers' road. Supposedly, rebel soldiers had once marched up the road across Soldiers' Bridge to keep the town from falling into the hands of the Yankee army. But I had my doubts about that. After all, who in his right mind would want to capture Strawberry, or defend it for that matter? The road was hilly and curving, and as we sped over it, scattered road stones hit sharply against the car's underbelly, and the dust swelled up in rolls of billowing clouds behind us. Little Man, Christopher John, and I shrieked with delight each time the car climbed a hill and dropped suddenly downward, fluttering our stomachs. Eventually, the road intersected with the Jefferson Davis School Road. Uncle Hammer stopped the car at the intersection and, leaning his right arm heavily over the steering wheel, motioned languidly at the Wallace store. "Got me a mind to burn that place out," he said. "Hammer, hush that kind of talk," ordered Big Ma, her eyes growing wide. "Me and John Henry and David grew up together. And John Henry, remember John Henry is John Henry Berry. And John Henry and me even fought in their war together. What good was it? A black man's life ain't worth the life of a cowfly down here." "I know that, son, but that kind of talk gonna get you hung, and you know it." Mama touched Uncle Hammer's arm. "There might be another way, Hammer, like I told you. Now don't go doing something foolish. Wait for David. Talk with him." Uncle Hammer looked glassy-eyed at the store and then sighed and eased the Packard across the road toward Soldiers' Bridge. We were taking the long way home. Soldiers' Bridge was built before the Civil War. It was spindly and wooden, and each time I had to cross it, I held my breath until we were safely on the other side. Only one vehicle could cross at a time, and whoever was on the bridge first was supposed to have the right of way. Although it didn't always work that way. More than once, when I'd been in the wagon with Mama or Big Ma, we had to back off the bridge when a white family started across after we were already on the bridge. As the bridge came into view, the other side of the river was clearly visible, and it was obvious to everyone that an old Model T truck overflowing with red-headed children had reached the bridge first and was about to cross. But suddenly, Uncle Hammer gassed the Packard and sped onto the creaking structure. The driver of the truck stopped and for no more than a second hesitated on the bridge, then without a single honk of protest, backed off so that we could pass. Why is that? They think he's Mr. Granger, right? Because he bought the same car as Mr. Granger. "Hammer!" Big Ma cried. "They think you're Mr. Granger." "Well, now, won't they be surprised when we reach the other side?" said Uncle Hammer. As we came off the bridge, we could see the Wallaces. All three of them, Dewberry, Thurston, and Caleb, touched their hats respectfully, then immediately freeze as they saw who we were. Uncle Hammer, straight-faced and totally calm, touched the brim of his own hat in polite response, and without a backward glance, sped away, leaving the Wallaces gaping silently after us. Stacy, Christopher John, Little Man, and I laughed, but Mama's cold glance made us stop. "You shouldn't have done that, Hammer," she said quietly. "The opportunity, dear sister, was too much to resist. But one day we're going to have to pay for it. Believe me," she said, "one day we'll pay." And we know that Hammer knows that better than anyone, because we know the character, Hammer's character. That's the end of chapter 6.